In 1987, two Catholic nuns went missing from a quiet missionary home in rural Arizona. No struggle, no bodies, just silence. For years, the case remained cold until the FBI uncovered something 5 years later that would flip the investigation upside down. What happened in that missionary home wasn't just strange. It was methodical, deeply human, and terrifying. Now let's begin. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The missionary home sat at the edge of Yuma, Arizona. It wasn't much: beige stucco walls, a crumbling chapel, and a dried-up well in the back. But to Sisters Margaret Doyle and Beatrice Langston, it was home. Both nuns had been stationed there for nearly 7 years, offering food, shelter, and education to the rural poor. They lived simple, structured lives. Woke at 5 a.m., prayer until 6, followed by breakfast, and then community service until sundown. It was peaceful, predictable. Until Thursday, August 13th, 1987. That morning, Sister Elizabeth Moreno, a visiting nun from Phoenix, arrived to drop off medical supplies. She knocked twice at the front door. No one answered. She tried the side entrance. Still nothing. What struck her immediately was the silence. Usually, you'd hear the humming of hymns or the scraping of brooms on tile. But that day there was nothing. Not even birds. Elizabeth let herself in. Inside, the missionary was spotless. No signs of forced entry. The morning's breakfast, 2 plates of scrambled eggs and toast, sat untouched on the kitchen table, now cold and stiff. The only oddity was the back door. It was slightly open, creaking with the wind. Outside, footprints trailed off into the desert. 2 sets. Deep, sharp heel impressions. Not the soft shuffle of nuns in sandals. These were heavier, more rushed. Elizabeth called the police. By noon, local law enforcement sealed off the area. Bloodhounds were brought in, but quickly lost the scent past the scrubland. There were no tire tracks, no signs of struggle, no ransom note, no body. The last entry in Sister Margaret's journal, found on her nightstand, read, "He was here again last night, just outside the fence, watching." That one sentence changed everything. 2 detectives from Yuma PD were assigned the case: Detective Rena Carter and Detective William Hayes. Carter was sharp, methodical, and knew how to read people. Hayes was ex-military, impatient, and didn't believe in ghosts or stalkers. Their first assumption was that the nuns had run away. But their passports were untouched, and their bank accounts hadn't been touched in over a year. "We're not looking at runaways," Carter said. "This is abduction planned." The case moved to the FBI within 2 weeks. Lead agent Thomas Rourke took over, an aging field agent known for busting human trafficking rings along the Mexican border. He'd seen worse. But something about this case nagged at him. The missionary home was surrounded by desert, no cameras, no witnesses, just an old truck stopped 5 miles away. Rourke sent agents to interview the workers there. A gas station attendant, a jittery 19-year-old named Cody, mentioned seeing a black Bronco with no plates, idling near the highway the night before the disappearance. "Didn't think much of it," Cody admitted. "But I remember it because it had one of those Jesus fish stickers on the bumper." "Religious people," Rourke muttered. "Smart cover." Meanwhile, the forensic team swept the missionary. No fingerprints, no hair. The only clue came from the laundry room. A single shoe, Sister Beatrice's, was found behind the washer. The heel was smeared with something brownish red. Lab confirmed it blood, but it wasn't hers. Months passed. Nothing. Tips came in, sightings of the nuns in California, Texas, even Tijuana. All dead ends. By January 1988, the case was cold, until a woman named Erica Blake walked into a police station in El Paso. She was 42, thin, with bruises on her arms and dried blood on her knees. Said she'd escaped from a house out in Hidalgo County, New Mexico. Claimed she'd been trafficked by a small religious cult operating under the guise of a healing retreat. "I saw them," she whispered. "The 2 women. The ones with the white veils." Rourke got on a plane the same night. They found the house, a 2-story structure in the middle of the desert, abandoned. Inside, mattresses on the floor, chains bolted to the wall, broken rosaries. But no nuns, no other victims, and no cult members. Just one Polaroid tucked inside a torn Bible. It showed two women kneeling on a cement floor, hands tied behind their backs. Their faces were swollen, beaten, but unmistakably Margaret and Beatrice. The photo was dated October 1987. They had been alive for at least 2 months after their disappearance. Rourke nearly crushed the picture in his hand. "We're not dealing with a random crime," he said. "This is organized. Someone's hiding behind faith to run something darker." That's when he began looking into old cases, disappearances that had never made headlines. Runaways, migrant workers, teenage girls from border towns. One by one, the pattern became clear. Every few months, another person vanished near a religious compound, a missionary post, or a spiritual wellness farm. A list was compiled, 12 names. Now 14. The question was, who was orchestrating this? In late 1988, a break. A stolen van was found abandoned near Phoenix with a VIN that matched a missing vehicle from the Yuma area. Inside, they found fake missionary documents and a crate of surgical supplies. Most damning was a binder with names, dates, and coded language, deliveries, blessings, harvests. The van had been wiped clean, but a partial fingerprint on the glove box led to a man named Samuel Creed. Creed was a former seminary dropout, arrested twice in the 70s for assault, and suspected in a series of disappearances across Texas. But he'd vanished in 1984. Until now. Rourke's team tracked Creed's last known associate, a woman named Naomi Becker, living in Nogales under the alias Sister Grace. When the FBI raided her home, she bolted. Gun drawn. A brief shootout left one agent wounded and Naomi in cuffs. Under interrogation, she broke. "I was only helping," she hissed. "He said it was God's work. He said they were chosen." "Where are they?" Rourke demanded. Naomi just smiled. "You're too late." The moment Naomi Becker muttered, "You're too late," Agent Rourke slammed his fist on the table. He wasn't the type to show emotion during an interrogation, but this case had been eating at him for months. Naomi looked unbothered, even smug, like she knew something he didn't, and that didn't sit well with him. "Too late for what?" he barked. "You'll see," she whispered. Rourke didn't have time for games. He stormed out of the room, leaving Agent Kayla Mendez to continue the questioning. She had a calmer approach, softer, more controlled. She slid Naomi a cup of water and sat down slowly. "Naomi, we're not asking you to be a hero," Mendez said. "But if those women are still alive, you have one chance to do the right thing." "One." Naomi stared at the wall for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then finally she muttered, "There's a place in Santa Rosa. But you didn't hear it from me." That was all they needed. Within hours, the FBI organized a tactical unit. Santa Rosa, New Mexico, was a dusty town of less than 3,000 people, quiet, sun-baked, and isolated. According to Naomi, the compound was hidden several miles outside the town in the desert. No signs, no markings, just a dirt road that led nowhere on paper. They left before dawn. 4 black SUVs moved in silence across the highway. Rourke was in the lead vehicle with Mendez beside him, reviewing aerial maps and old satellite shots. "Look," she said, pointing to a faint clearing near the riverbed. "Could be something." They reached the turnoff at 6:42 a.m. The dirt road was narrow and overgrown. As they drove deeper, the shrubs became thicker, the air hotter. After 15 minutes, they saw it. A small cluster of buildings surrounded by a makeshift fence made of corrugated metal and barbed wire. It didn't look like a church. It looked like a prison. Rourke ordered the team to stop. He radioed, "No signs of activity yet. Moving slow, we go on my signal." The agents fanned out. Some went around the perimeter, others stayed close behind Rourke and Mendez. They approached the main gate. It was unlocked. Inside the compound, there were 5 buildings. One was a large barn with boarded-up windows. Another looked like an office trailer. The rest were small, windowless shacks. Everything was silent. "Something's off," Mendez said, gun drawn. They split up. Rourke and 2 agents entered the barn. Dust floated in the beams of morning light cutting through gaps in the wood. The place smelled like bleach and mold. Chains hung from the walls. There were stained mattresses, scattered clothes, and a locked freezer in the back. I pried it open. Empty. Meanwhile, Agent Mendez entered the office trailer. A desk, some shelves, and folders. Lots of folders. She opened the first one, lists of names, some crossed out, others with photos paperclipped to the top. One of them was Sister Margaret. The word transferred was scribbled beside her name. She flipped to the next folder. It was Sister Beatrice. Her photo had a red X over it. Mendez froze. Suddenly, a creak behind her. She spun around, gun raised. A man stepped into the trailer, maybe mid-40s, white tank top, soaked with sweat, beard thick and matted. His right hand was behind his back. "Don't move," Mendez shouted. The man smiled. She stepped closer. "Hands where I can see them." He didn't listen. He lunged. Mendez fired. The man crumpled with a grunt, clutching his shoulder. His hand hit the floor. He had been holding a screwdriver. Within seconds, backup arrived and cuffed him. His name was Eli Monroe, one of Creed's former followers. He was bleeding, swearing, but alive. Rourke stepped into the trailer and took one look at the folders. "Jesus," he muttered. They were cataloging them. He grabbed the one with Margaret's picture and held it up to Monroe. "Where is she?" Monroe coughed, then smirked. "Long gone." Rourke leaned in. "You either tell me where she is, or you're going to rot so far under the prison, you'll need a ladder to see the sun." Monroe hesitated. The smirk faded. "There's another site," he said. "A warehouse. Tucson. But you didn't hear that from me." The FBI wasted no time. By nightfall, they had Monroe in custody and a team en route to Tucson. Rourke didn't sleep. Neither did Mendez. The thought that the nuns might still be alive, 5 years after vanishing, was keeping them both wired. They reached Tucson by the next morning and met with local agents. The warehouse in question was located in an industrial district, fenced off and seemingly abandoned. The place had no signage, no records, nothing in the city's property logs. Classic ghost operation. As the team prepared to breach, a black pickup truck suddenly sped out of the rear loading dock. Tires screeched, dirt flew. "Go! Go!" Rourke shouted. The agents jumped in their SUVs. A chase ensued through narrow alleyways and empty service roads. Pickup weaved in and out of traffic, nearly hitting 2 cars. Mendez took the front and cut off an intersection, forcing the truck to swerve. It crashed into a pole. The driver jumped out running. Rourke and another agent chased him on foot. The man was fast, desperate. He darted through a construction site, climbed over a chain-link fence, and ran across a parking lot. Rourke tackled him from behind. They rolled across the ground, fists swinging. The man landed a hard punch to Rourke's jaw, but the agent didn't stop. He pinned him, cuffed him, and dragged him to his feet. "Where are they?" Rourke growled. "Where are the women?" The man spat blood and grinned. "You'll wish you never asked." Back at the warehouse, agents breached the doors. Inside, rows of shipping crates, medical supplies, and rows of lockers labeled with code names. In one corner, there were beds, small, metal-framed, with restraint belts attached. And a sound, soft, a thumping. It was coming from a locked storage room. Agents kicked it in. Inside was a woman, thin, pale, dressed in a torn white habit, shackled at the ankles. She shielded her eyes from the light. "Ma'am," one agent whispered, "we're here to help." She looked up slowly. "My name is Margaret." Agent Rourke crouched beside the woman in the locked storage room, his hand trembling as he reached for the key on his belt. Her wrists were raw from the cuffs, her face thin and bruised. But it was her eyes that hit him the hardest, wide, hollow, like she hadn't seen sunlight in years. "You're safe now," he said. She flinched. He slowly unlocked her shackles. The clinking of the metal echoed in the silence of the warehouse. The woman didn't move right away. She just sat there, breathing heavily, eyes darting around like she didn't believe what was happening. "My name is Margaret," she whispered again. Rourke and Mendez exchanged a look. This was real. Sister Margaret Doyle, missing for 5 years, was alive. Paramedics arrived minutes later and rushed her to the hospital under heavy security. Mendez rode with her, asking gentle questions, but Margaret barely responded. She kept muttering names Beatrice, Naomi, Creed, and one other name, Elijah. At the hospital, doctors treated her for dehydration, malnutrition, and multiple fractures that had healed without proper care. Her records showed she had lost nearly 30 pounds since her last known weight. After a few hours of fluids and food, Margaret finally spoke. "I need to tell someone everything," she said softly, "before they find me again." Rourke cleared the hospital room and set up a recorder. Margaret sat upright, gripping the edge of her blanket. It started 6 months before we disappeared, she said. We noticed someone kept leaving notes on our door. Bible verses, strange ones. What kind of strange? Mendez asked. They were about sacrifice, blood, obedience. Margaret paused. We thought it was just someone messing with us, until we started seeing him. Who? Elijah Creed. That name made Rourke sit up straighter. He used to stand across the field near the fence. Never came close, just watched. Always at night. Margaret went on to explain how Beatrice, her fellow nun, had started having terrible dreams. One night, she found Beatrice crying in the laundry room, terrified that someone had been inside their home. We should have reported it right away, Margaret said. But we were scared of being told we were imagining things. The night of their disappearance was burned into Margaret's memory. It was just past midnight. They were both asleep when the back door creaked open. At first, Margaret thought it was the wind, but then she heard footsteps. Several. Before she could get out of bed, someone grabbed her. They covered my face with a pillowcase and tied my hands, she said, trembling. I heard Beatrice scream once, then nothing. They were thrown into the back of a van and driven for hours. No lights, no talking. The first place they were taken to was an old ranch house in the middle of nowhere. There were other women there, some older, some barely in their teens. All terrified, all silent. There were rules, Margaret said. You didn't speak unless spoken to. You didn't ask questions. And you never looked them in the eyes. Rourke leaned forward. Who were they? They called themselves the Circle, Margaret said. They believed they were cleansing people for God. But it was just torture, starvation, beatings. She paused. They used the missionary homes as scouting stations, places to watch, to choose who they would take. The FBI had heard whispers of groups like this before, small, underground rings that disguised themselves as religious sanctuaries but operated like organized crime. Most were never caught. They left behind no fingerprints, no paperwork, and no survivors. Until now. Margaret remembered the warehouse in Tucson. She'd been moved there after 2 years in the ranch house. Beatrice wasn't with her. I asked about her every day, she said. They always said the same thing. She didn't pass. What does that mean? Mendez asked. Margaret looked down. She fought back. The room went silent. Rourke stepped out into the hallway and called his team. Run a search on any known properties linked to Elijah Creed in Arizona and New Mexico, he said. We're looking for ranches, abandoned churches, anything rural. Within an hour, results started pouring in. One caught their attention, a foreclosed farm outside Deming, New Mexico. It had changed ownership 3 times in the past 10 years, but each transaction was in cash and under a different shell company. The farm had been flagged once by Border Patrol for illegal activity, but was never raided. Rourke ordered a full team to move in. They arrived at dawn the next day. The farm was surrounded by fields of dead crops and rusted equipment. The main house had boarded windows, but smoke was coming from a chimney. Inside, it was worse than anything they had seen before. 3 women were found in a locked room in the basement. One had a broken arm. Another was barely conscious. The third was too weak to walk. None of them were Beatrice. But the agents did find something else. Records. Crates full of tapes, notebooks, and ledgers. Pages of handwritten notes labeled with dates and first names. In one, they found a page with 2 names, M. Doyle transfer to 2C39B. Langston failed obedience, removed 188, removed. The word made Rourke's stomach tighten. There was more. A map taped to the back of one cabinet showed arrows and lines drawn in red. Circles over Arizona, Texas, and even a mark in northern Mexico. They weren't just keeping victims. They were moving them. That same day, a forensics team found something buried behind the barn, a shallow grave. Inside was a body. The dress matched Beatrice Langston's order. But they'd need confirmation. Back in Tucson, Margaret sat quietly in her hospital bed, holding a rosary someone had given her. I prayed every day, she said, not for rescue, but that if I died, someone would know the truth. She looked up at Rourke. You found me. So now it's your turn. He nodded. We'll find them all. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The sun was just rising over the desert when Rourke stood near the shallow grave at the old farm. The forensic team carefully lifted the body out. He didn't need a DNA test to know. The moment he saw the cross stitched into the torn fabric of the dress, he felt it deep in his chest. It was Sister Beatrice, but there was no time to grieve. Not yet. Rourke knew what this meant. Creed wasn't just running a ring, he was executing a system. One that stretched farther and deeper than anyone had guessed. And worse, he was still out there. Back at the field office in Tucson, Mendez met with a tech team that had started digging through the notebooks and tapes from the farm. The handwriting varied, but one name kept coming up across nearly every document. E. Creed, or sometimes just Elijah, in one tape labeled 1988, a man's voice played through a static-filled speaker. Calm, confident, dangerous. We do not take women, we choose souls. Weak ones, strong ones, some pass. Break, God sorts the rest. The voice sent chills down Mendez's spine. She looked up. Can we trace this? The tech shook his head. Old camcorder. No metadata. We'll have to match the voice. She handed the tape over to forensics. Do it. Meanwhile, Rourke was focused on Creed's pattern. He had moved in cycles, always every 3 to 4 months. Always choosing remote locations, always using cash. The shell companies used to buy property all followed a strange theme, names of apostles, angels, and saints. One stood out, J. Thaddeus Holdings, LLC. A quick cross-reference showed they had purchased a cabin compound outside Flagstaff, Arizona, just 6 months earlier. No one had checked it yet. Rourke didn't wait. He pulled together a 5-man tactical team, including Mendez, and headed straight for Flagstaff. They arrived in the afternoon. The compound was hidden in the pines, a series of log cabins behind a tall wooden fence. It looked like a summer retreat, peaceful, quiet. Too quiet. The front gate was locked with a fresh padlock. Rourke gave the signal. One agent cut the lock while the others spread out around the perimeter. The air was still, no sounds, no people. They moved in. Cabin by cabin, they cleared the buildings. One had bunk beds, another had a kitchen. All of them looked lived in, but no one was there. Food in the fridge. Warm water still dripping from a faucet. A cigarette still smoldering in an ashtray. They left in a hurry, Mendez said. Rourke opened the last cabin. It was different. Cleaner. More organized. This was where someone in charge had stayed. On the table, a stack of fake passports, a roll of cash, and a manila folder. He opened it. Inside were surveillance photos, some recent. His heart stopped. It was Margaret. The photos showed her walking out of the hospital in Tucson, eating lunch with an agent, sitting in the garden. Whoever took them had been watching closely. They knew we found her, Rourke said. They were planning to silence her. He turned to Mendez. They're tracking her. That means Creed's getting desperate. Back at the hospital, security was tightened immediately. Agents surrounded the building, while Margaret was moved to a secure floor under an alias. She didn't panic when they told her, just nodded like she expected it. I told you, she said. They never let anyone go. Rourke stayed with her that night. She told him more about Elijah, his habits, the way he spoke, how he believed he was cleansing sin through control. He never showed rage. He punished with silence, isolation, or forced fasting, sometimes for days. He thought he was purifying us, Margaret said. He called it his garden. We were the seeds. Only the strong grew. Rourke didn't flinch. But inside his anger was building. Meanwhile, analysts working through old banking records found a lead. One of the shell companies had made a recent purchase, an old freight garage in Albuquerque. The payment was in cash, delivered in person by a man matching Creed's description. The agents moved immediately. They arrived late in the evening, surrounding the building silently. The garage was massive concrete walls, rusted roll-up doors, no windows. They waited for Rourke's command. Then they breached. Smoke filled the air as the metal doors slammed open. Agents flooded inside. Gunfire erupted. 2 armed men opened fire from behind a stack of crates. Bullets cracked through the air. One agent took a hit to the shoulder and dropped. Rourke ducked behind cover and returned fire, hitting one of the men in the leg. The second tried to run. Mendez chased him through the maze of crates and tackled him hard to the floor. When the gunfire stopped, both suspects were down and cuffed. They weren't Elijah. but they were part of the ring. One was identified as a recruiter named David Marks, already flagged by the FBI. The other refused to speak, until Rourke stepped in. "You're done," Rourke said. "We have your voice, your fingerprints, and your friend back there gave us a name." He leaned in closer. "And you're going to tell me where Elijah is." The man laughed. "You think he's hiding?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "He's not running. He's already started the next garden." They didn't sleep that night. Rourke knew what that meant. Somewhere, a new site had already begun. New victims, a new cycle. He ordered a full review of all recent land purchases, supply shipments, and rental records tied to any of the known shell companies. At 3:45 a.m., a new flag popped up. A delivery of fencing, canned food, and portable beds made just 2 weeks ago to a remote parcel of land in the mountains outside Silver City, New Mexico. Property owner, Michael Eden. Another fake name. The coordinates matched a stretch of high desert with no cell coverage and only one dirt road in. That had to be it. Rourke turned to Mendez. "We move at sunrise." The air was dry and thin as the FBI convoy crept up the winding dirt road outside Silver City, New Mexico. The mountain terrain made visibility difficult, with steep hills and tall brush blocking most of the view ahead. Rourke's SUV led the line of 6 vehicles. He checked the time. 6:12 a.m. "We go slow," he told Mendez. "We don't spook them. If he's there, I want him alive." The property in question had no formal address, just GPS coordinates. As they reached the final bend, the terrain opened up. There it was. A newly built compound in the middle of nowhere, 5 wooden structures, a watchtower, and a makeshift gate with heavy fencing. No flags, no signs, just silence. Rourke raised his radio. "All teams hold. We go on foot from here." The agents moved in groups, rifles drawn, boots quiet against the dirt. The sun was just peeking over the hills, casting long shadows across the compound. The main gate was chained shut. Rourke gave a silent signal. 2 agents cut the lock. The gate creaked open. They slipped inside. The compound was strange. Clean, organized, and eerily quiet. One building had what looked like a small chapel. Another had clothes hanging on a line, women's dresses neatly washed. A few children's toys sat in the dirt, untouched. But there were no people, no sound. Not even birds. Mendez whispered, "They knew we were coming." Rourke nodded. "Let's clear every building." The first house had rows of bunk beds. On the walls were simple posters, Bible verses, drawings, schedules for chores and reflection. The second building had a kitchen and pantry, stocked with canned goods, water jugs, and powdered milk. All new, all untouched. The third building was different. It was locked tight. Rourke kicked it in. Inside were rows of chairs, a whiteboard with handwritten messages like, "Silence is strength," "Obedience is safety," and in the corner, a camera on a tripod. They had been filming something. Or someone. Mendez opened a drawer and pulled out tapes, dozens of them, all labeled by date. "This was a teaching hall," she said. Rourke's eyes scanned the room. This was an indoctrination center. Suddenly, a voice came through the radio. "North Perimeter movement. 2 unidentified subjects, female." Rourke and Mendez sprinted out the back door and followed the signal. Near the brush, 2 women stumbled out, thin, dirty, terrified. Their clothes were torn. One of them had a split lip. The other was limping. Agents rushed in and surrounded them. "We're with the FBI," Mendez said gently. "You're safe now." One of the women looked up and asked, "Is he gone?" "Who?" Mendez asked. "Elijah." The women collapsed into sobs. Back at the main compound, agents searched every inch. In a small cabin near the watchtower, they found a leather-bound notebook with daily logs. Rourke flipped through the pages. One entry read, "June 4th, relocated the remaining seeds. 3 failed. 2 are ready. The garden is closed. I must return to the roots." That was 2 days ago. Creed was gone. But he had left a trail. Inside the chapel building, something caught Rourke's eye. A map, tacked to the wall with red pins marking several locations across the southwest. One had a circle around it, Yuma. Another was circled twice, Calexico. Underneath it was a phrase, "Harvest 7 final bloom." He stared at it in silence. Mendez entered behind him. "What is it?" "I think he's going back to where it started." They returned to headquarters and brought in the 2 rescued women for medical treatment and questioning. Both had been held for over a year. Their stories matched Margaret's almost exactly. Controlled movement, constant silence, obedience through punishment. One of them had seen Elijah just 2 days earlier. "He's not hiding," she said. "He's preparing something." The FBI worked around the clock for the next 48 hours. They tracked Creed's last known vehicle, a white van purchased in El Paso under a fake ID, last seen heading west toward California. Rourke believed the final bloom meant one thing, a final group. Possibly a final act, he wasn't sure what it was. But he couldn't take any chances. A lead came through late that night. Border Patrol intercepted a coded radio transmission near Calexico. The words were scrambled, but one part was clear. Stage complete. Eden is ready. Rourke's team was already moving before the transmission ended. They reached Calexico the next morning. The desert sun was brutal, the wind dry. Local police had identified a fenced-off area on the outskirts, an old school building once used for migrant housing, now abandoned. But someone had recently restored it. Fresh paint, new locks, electricity running from a portable generator. Rourke's team set up around the building. From a distance, they could see figures moving inside. Women. Some children, all dressed in plain gray clothing. "This is it," he said. Mendez looked through binoculars. No guards outside, but too quiet. "Could be a trap." Rourke gave the order. "Go silent. Sweep the building." The entry team moved fast. They burst through the side entrance and spread through the halls. Inside were 5 rooms, each one with bunk beds, minimal furniture, and barred windows. In one room, they found 6 women huddled together. The look on their faces said it all. "Please," one of them said, "please don't leave us here." The agents cleared the remaining rooms. Still no sign of Elijah until they reached the basement. A metal door led down to a concrete stairwell. The air was damp, stale. Rourke led the way, gun raised, heart pounding. At the bottom was a corridor, 2 doors. They checked the first, empty. Then the second. Inside was a small office, a desk, a radio set, papers, and a man. He was sitting calmly in a chair. Clean clothes, trimmed beard. No weapons. "Elijah Creed," Rourke said. The man looked up, smiling. "I knew you'd come." Rourke didn't hesitate. He cuffed him, pushed him against the wall, and read him his rights. Creed didn't fight, didn't speak. Not until they started walking him out. "You can cut down the garden," he said, "but the roots are already buried. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more." Elijah Creed sat calmly in the federal holding room in San Diego. Despite being surrounded by armed agents, the man looked like he was sitting for a school portrait. Shirt tucked, hair trimmed, no twitch. No fear. Agent Rourke watched him through the 2-way glass. "He's too calm," said Mendez, standing beside him. "He wanted to be caught." "I know," Rourke replied, "but I'm not playing his game." They stepped inside. Creed didn't flinch. "Agent Rourke," he said, like they were old friends. "And Agent Mendez, what an honor." "You ran a torture ring," Rourke said plainly. "You kidnapped women, held them like animals. Some didn't survive." Creed tilted his head, still smiling. "I offered them truth." "No," Rourke said, "you offered control." Creed leaned back in his chair. "People will always follow someone who makes them feel seen." "I just gave them something to believe in." Mendez placed a folder on the table. Inside were photos: Margaret, Beatrice, the graves, the shackles. Creed didn't even glance. "Where's the rest of them?" Rourke demanded. "We found 10. There were more. Dozens more." "I told you," Creed said. "The roots go deep." The FBI knew Creed was hiding something. Probably a lot. The compound in Calexico had revealed more than expected: ledgers, coded documents, even tapes. But many of the women they rescued didn't appear in any records. Some weren't even listed under their real names. That meant one thing. There were still victims out there. Rourke knew he had to break Creed, and fast. He called in the behavioral analysis unit from Quantico to assist with the interviews. They studied Creed's speech, his mannerisms, his use of religious metaphors. One analyst, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Celia Monroe, saw a pattern. "He speaks in layers," she said. "Always about planting, growth, roots, harvest. Those are not just metaphors. They're locations, stages. Each word is coded." She showed them Creed's journal from the Silver City compound. One page read, "Harvest complete, Eden relocated. The orchard begins soon. Pray they are ready." The orchard, Monroe said. That might be the final location. Rourke and Mendez worked with the intel team to scan property sales, supply deliveries, and rental agreements using Creed's code names. Finally, they hit a match. 3 weeks before his capture, a shell company called Fruit of Light Inc. had purchased a piece of farmland near Bakersfield, California. It had once been a vineyard. Now it was fenced off, patrolled by private security, and registered under an alias tied to one of Creed's closest lieutenants. This was it. The orchard. By the next morning, a task force was airborne. 25 agents, 2 helicopters. No media, no warning. They touched down a few miles from the site and moved in on foot. The sun was just rising, casting a red glow across the dry fields. The air smelled like dust and silence. They split into teams. Rourke and Mendez led Bravo team through the north side of the property. The vineyard rows were long and twisted, forming natural corridors between the buildings. They reached the central structure, an old farmhouse surrounded by motion sensors and a single surveillance camera hanging from a pole. "Cut the power," Rourke ordered. An agent clipped the line. Lights went out. Seconds later, the back door creaked open, and a man stepped outside holding a flashlight. "FBI!" someone yelled. The man dropped the flashlight and tried to run. Too late. He was tackled hard to the ground and cuffed before he could get 10 steps. Inside, the farmhouse was quiet until they reached the cellar door. There were voices, soft, whispering. Praying, Rourke and Mendez crept down the steps. At the bottom, in a large room dimly lit by battery-powered lanterns, were at least 8 women and 2 boys none older than 14. Some were wearing hospital gowns. Others wore gray uniforms. All looked malnourished and confused. One woman stood up and shouted, "Are you real?" "Yes," Mendez said quickly. "We're FBI." "You're safe now." The group burst into sobs. Agents quickly moved them out, one by one. Outside, medics were ready. Helicopters arrived within the hour to airlift the victims to nearby hospitals. Rourke walked through the compound slowly. Behind the farmhouse, he found something strange, a small wooden shed, padlocked from the outside. He broke it open. Inside, he found a single chair, a camera, a microphone, and a logbook. It was used for recordings, confessions, reprogramming. On the table was a single cassette labeled Eden Testimony 392. Rourke picked it up, feeling something heavy in his chest. Back in San Diego, Creed was silent. He hadn't said a word in over 24 hours. Not since the Bakersfield raid. He was in a separate cell now, no visitors, no books, no pens. But Rourke wasn't done. He walked in and tossed the cassette on the table. Creed glanced at it. Just once. "We found your orchard," Rourke said. "We found your tapes. We found your little garden of faith. But this one's different." Creed's eyes narrowed. "This is from Eden, isn't it?" Rourke asked. "Your final experiment." Creed finally spoke. "She volunteered." Rourke slammed his hand on the table. "She was a child." Creed's calm slipped just for a second. A twitch, a blink, then he smiled again. "You can't stop faith," he said. "No," Rourke said, leaning in. "But I can bury you so deep you'll forget what daylight looks like." Rourke and Mendez stayed up that night reviewing everything from the raid, photos, files, the confession tapes. The most disturbing was a folder labeled "Foundations for the Next Cycle." Inside, blueprints for a new site. It was offshore. Creed wasn't just trying to hide. He had plans to expand foreign territory. Loopholes. Less oversight. But now that he was in custody, the FBI had their foot in the door. At 3:22 a.m., a junior analyst burst into Rourke's office with a folder. "Sir," he said breathlessly, "there's something else. One of the tapes, audio from Eden, mentions a name we haven't seen before." The analyst flipped the folder open. A screen capture from the tape showed a woman, about 40, with dark eyes and a firm voice. "Name's Teresa Klein. She says she helped train the recruits. She ran the California site before Creed came in." "She's still out there?" Mendez asked. "Yeah, and she's not hiding." Rourke stood up and grabbed his jacket. "Then we find her." It was 8:40 a.m. when Agent Rourke and Mendez touched down in Oakland, California. The skies were cloudy, the air sharp with fog and city noise. But neither of them were distracted. They were there for one reason: Teresa Klein. On paper, she was a middle-aged nutritionist who ran a nonprofit in San Jose. But on tape, she was something else, calm, commanding, and cruel. She had spoken on 2 different Eden tapes. Both times, she was instructing women how to empty themselves before becoming part of the garden. The FBI had finally found a link, an anonymous tip from one of the rescued victims who had been moved between Calexico and Eden. She ran the interviews, the woman said. She picked who stayed, who got punished, and who disappeared. They needed to find her, fast. The nonprofit she ran was a community wellness center near a bus terminal in San Jose. It looked harmless, just another small building with a faded sign, a few healthy eating posters in the window. But when agents set up surveillance the day before, they spotted something odd. Multiple women going in. None ever came out. Not in hours, not until nightfall. Rourke stood outside in an unmarked SUV, watching through binoculars. Then he saw her, Teresa Klein, shoulder-length dark hair, a neat gray sweater, clipboard in hand. She greeted a man at the door with a soft smile, nodded, and led him inside. No hesitation, no fear. "She's not running," Mendez muttered. "She's recruiting." Rourke tapped his radio. "Teams move in now." They stormed the building from 3 sides. Front entrance, back alley, side gate. Rourke kicked open the front door with Mendez behind him, gun raised. "FBI, hands where we can see them." Inside, the building was quiet, but not empty. 2 young women were in a small room, seated at a table with pamphlets in front of them. One looked up confused. The other flinched. Then from the hallway, a door slammed shut. "Back hall!" Mendez yelled. Rourke sprinted after the sound, boot steps echoing against tile. He reached the door and shoved it open. Teresa was halfway through a service door into the alley. She turned and froze. "Teresa Klein!" he shouted. "FBI, don't move!" She raised her hands slowly. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. They cuffed her without a struggle. Back at the field office, she remained stone-faced during booking. No questions asked, no answers given. It wasn't until she was alone with Rourke and Mendez in the interrogation room that she finally spoke. "I'm not Elijah," she said. "I didn't touch them." "But you picked them," Mendez shot back. "You moved them. You led them." Teresa didn't argue. "I prepared them," she said softly. "It was always their choice." Rourke slammed a photo on the table, one of a young girl from the Eden compound, barely 15. "She didn't choose this," he said. Teresa looked at the photo. "That wasn't Eden. That was something else. I never wanted that." "What do you mean?" Mendez asked. "Elijah changed," Teresa whispered. "After the Arizona raid, he became obsessed. It wasn't about saving anymore. It was about punishing." She leaned forward. "I left months ago. He told me I was too soft. Said the next garden had to be pure. That I wouldn't be part of it." They didn't fully believe her, but she was giving details. Real ones. She explained how Elijah had kept a second set of files, records of everyone who ever went through his program. Not all were prisoners. Some joined willingly. Others were trafficked. Many had simply vanished. He kept backups, Teresa said, in case anyone betrayed him. He called it the fall log. He kept it inside a church. "A church?" Rourke asked. "Yes, his original one. The place it all started." The church was in rural Texas. An old missionary post where Elijah Creed first volunteered in the early 80s, before any of the crimes started. Before the disappearances. Before Margaret and Beatrice. Records showed it had burned down in 1985. But according to Teresa, the basement had survived, and Elijah returned there often. He said it was his route, she told them. "That's where it all began." Rourke's jaw tightened. "That's where Beatrice and Margaret were chosen, isn't it?" Teresa nodded once. They were the first seeds. They flew to Texas that same day. The church ruins were deep in the countryside, overgrown, broken, with burned beams sticking up like broken teeth. But just behind the altar stood a stone staircase, half covered in brush. It led underground. Rourke, Mendez, and a tactical team descended with flashlights and weapons ready. At the bottom was a long concrete corridor. Moist air, molded walls, a locked door. One agent picked it open. Inside was a small room, bare but clean. A table, 3 filing cabinets. One locked crate. Rourke opened the first drawer of the cabinet. Rows of files, each labeled with a first name, date of birth, and a number. Over 100 files. He opened the crate. Inside were VHS tapes, hundreds of them, each labeled by hand. They had found it. The fall log. It took weeks to go through everything. Some files were outdated. Others were incomplete, but many included names, photos, locations, and even a few receipts for property transactions tied to Elijah's network. They finally had proof of how deep it ran, proof of who helped, and most importantly, proof of who else was still missing. Back in San Diego, Margaret was recovering. The news reached her slowly, one arrest at a time. One rescued woman at a time. Rourke sat with her in the hospital garden one evening. "We found the place where it all started," he told her. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she looked at him. "Did you find Beatrice?" His eyes lowered. "We found where she was," he said carefully. "We know the truth now, and we're making sure everyone else does too." Margaret wiped her eyes. Then she didn't die for nothing. The next week, the Department of Justice launched a multi-state investigation. Over 40 arrests followed. 8 separate hideouts were raided. The media called it the Garden Cult, but Rourke hated that name. It sounded too dramatic, too far from what it really was. This wasn't a cult. It was a system, a chain, and it had finally been broken. But Elijah Creed wasn't done talking. In the final interrogation session, he leaned across the table and looked at Rourke. "You think this ends with me?" "No," Rourke said. "But it damn sure started with you." Creed smiled again, cold, hollow. "I planted more than you know." Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The small viewing room at the San Diego FBI field office was silent, except for the soft hum of the television and the steady click of a remote. Rourke sat forward, elbows on knees, eyes locked on the screen. Tape 47 was rolling. A shaky camera captured a dimly lit room with a single chair in the center. A woman barely older than 25 sat motionless. Her hands were tied in front of her, and she had a bruise near her eye. A voice off camera asked calmly, "Are you ready to confess?" She didn't speak. "Tell us how you turned away from the path." No answer. Then came the sound of a door opening, followed by heavy footsteps. Another voice, deeper this time, said, "If she doesn't speak by sundown, start the lesson." Rourke pressed pause, his jaw clenched. Every tape was worse than the last. There were over 200. Some dated back to 1987. Others were recent, less than a year old. Each one recorded inside Elijah Creed's network of re-education sites. They were used for intimidation, punishment, or something worse. And on one of the oldest tapes, dated May 1987, 2 women appeared standing in a long hallway. Margaret and Beatrice. The team spent hours reviewing the tape. Margaret was thinner than in the photos taken before her disappearance. Her hair had been shaved. She stood with her hands folded and her eyes lowered. Beatrice looked tired but not broken. She glanced around often, as if looking for an exit. Then Elijah stepped into frame. His voice was calm, measured, like a teacher addressing students. He spoke about obedience, about sacrifice, about sisters who must lead by suffering. He then pointed to Margaret. "She understands," he said. "But this one," he looked at Beatrice, "still resists the truth." Beatrice turned her head slightly, and in a low voice, she said, "I will not kneel for you." That was the last thing she ever said on camera. The screen went black. Mendez entered the room. Her face was pale. "I just got off the phone with Arizona PD, she said. "They found something in the Sonoran Desert. A shallow grave, no ID yet, but—" "She didn't have to finish," Rourke nodded. "Beatrice. They flew to Arizona the same afternoon. The site was remote, miles from any road. Bones had been uncovered by a group of hikers who noticed part of a shoe sticking out of the dirt. The remains matched Beatrice's last known height, age, and injuries seen on the tape. They also found a bracelet buried beside the body, one that Margaret had mentioned during questioning. It had small wooden beads and a silver cross. Beatrice's mother had given it to her before she left for the Missionary home in 1987. There was no question now, it was her. Margaret sat quietly in her hospital room as Rourke told her the news. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was calm. "She always said if they took us, she wouldn't come back." Rourke didn't know what to say. "I promised her I'd survive," Margaret said. So people would know. Rourke nodded slowly. They will. Back at the FBI office, agents were still combing through documents found at the Texas church. One file in particular stood out, titled Doctrine Plan 1993-1997. Inside were blueprints for expansion into South America, plans to open outposts in Peru, Colombia, and Brazil under missionary fronts, fake orphanages, wellness centers. The paperwork was old, but some of the bank records were still active, and money was still moving to this day. Someone had kept Creed's network alive even after his arrest. Rourke turned to Teresa Klein. He brought her back into the interview room, files in hand. You said you left after Eden, he said. But the money kept flowing. Who's running it now? She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Her voice rasped when she spoke. Elijah trusted 3 people, she said. Me, Levi, his lieutenant, and someone he called the messenger. Name, Rourke demanded. She hesitated. I only knew him as Grant. A quick search revealed his real identity. Grant Alston, a former accountant turned church treasurer in the early 90s. He had handled all of Elijah's finances, including overseas accounts. But Grant had gone off the grid in 1998. No phone, no digital footprint, no home address, until now. A new lead came from a flagged transaction. $20,000 wired from a dormant account to a small airstrip in Paraguay, just 3 weeks earlier. The name on the wire, G. Alston. By the following morning, the FBI coordinated with Interpol and South American authorities to launch a covert investigation near the region. What they found shook even the most hardened agents. A remote estate in the Paraguayan countryside with security fencing, guard dogs, and children seen tending gardens under surveillance cameras. Locals referred to it as La Verdad, the truth. It matched descriptions from old garden documents exactly. The mission now was global. Back in the States, Rourke was preparing his final request to Washington. He wanted the tapes released. Not to the media, but to the families. The mothers, the fathers, the sisters of the women who had vanished and never returned. He believed they had the right to know. DOJ pushed back. Too sensitive. Too dangerous. Too emotional. Rourke didn't care. These weren't just missing persons, he said in a meeting. These were stolen lives. It's not classified, it's evidence. Eventually, they approved it, with redactions. By month's end, over 60 families were contacted. Some broke down, others stared in stunned silence. But for many, it brought a kind of closure. They weren't just left wondering anymore. They knew. Meanwhile, Margaret was recovering faster than anyone expected. She started walking again, started speaking to other victims, started writing everything down. I need to put it all somewhere, she told Rourke. Not for me, for Beatrice. Creed was transferred to a federal prison in Colorado. No visitors, no books, 24-hour surveillance. But even in silence, he was smiling. Rourke visited him one last time. You're done, he told him. Your system is dead. Creed just looked up. Systems die. Faith doesn't. Rourke leaned in. This was never about faith. It was about control. And now you're the one who's controlled. He turned to leave. Creed spoke one final time. You never asked the right question. Rourke paused. What question? Creed's eyes gleamed. Why the nuns? Rourke sat at his desk just past midnight, a single lamp casting a soft glow over the clutter of folders, sticky notes, and half-empty coffee cups. His thoughts echoed. Why the nuns? That was the last thing Elijah Creed had said before Rourke walked out of that cold prison cell. Not with fear, not with anger, but with curiosity. And now it was gnawing at him. He pushed aside the files on the Paraguay site, the overseas wires, and the names of new victims coming to light. Instead, he went back to the beginning. 1987. The original missionary home in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. The day Beatrice and Margaret vanished. He pulled up an old report from the local police department. It had been overlooked because most early investigations were handled at the state level. But buried in the original paperwork was a sentence that caught Rourke's eye. 2 nuns reported missing. One had raised concern about large donations to out-of-state spiritual retreats. Sister Margaret mentioned she planned to report financial misuse the next day. Rourke sat up straight. They weren't random victims. They were a threat. The next morning he met Mendez at the field office. They weren't taken because they were nuns, he said. They were taken because they found something. Mendez frowned. Money? He nodded. Creed was already funneling cash through the church network in '87. Margaret and Beatrice probably saw paperwork or bank slips, something that didn't add up. And when they tried to speak out, he shut them up, Mendez said, shaking her head. Exactly. They pulled archived financial records from the Missionary Home's original sponsor church. The numbers were messy, but after hours of digging, one pattern emerged, a mysterious donation trail labeled under Missions Reinvestment. Every cent went to one organization, the Light of Harvest, a group Creed had set up under a fake name in California. On paper, it looked like a faith-based construction company. In reality, it was the very first step in his network. Margaret and Beatrice had stumbled into the core of it, and that had cost one of them her life. That same week, authorities raided the Paraguayan estate, La Verdad. The compound was larger than expected. Hidden tunnels, steel-reinforced doors, dozens of children and women rescued. Gunfire broke out during the operation. 4 of Creed's followers fought to the death. One of them was Grant Alston. He died exchanging fire with a local SWAT team. But just before he was taken down, he tried to burn a ledger inside the main office. Agents got to it in time. What they found made everything even worse. Inside the ledger was a list, handwritten. Each line included a date, a code, and a first name. Margaret, Beatrice, dozens more. Even recent ones rescued women who were still in recovery. The codes were transaction numbers. Creed hadn't just kidnapped and brainwashed. He had been selling people. The whole system, fake missions, recruitment, forced isolation, was a front for trafficking. And the nuns had discovered it before it ever went public. When Rourke showed the final proof to Margaret, she cried quietly. Not for herself, but for her friend. She tried to stop it, I remember. We found the letter, Margaret said. Beatrice was going to send it to the bishop. What letter? She never got the chance to mail it. With Margaret's help, Rourke and Mendez searched the old storage unit in El Paso, where Margaret's few remaining belongings had been kept after the abduction. At the bottom of a rotted suitcase, wrapped in a plastic Bible cover, was the letter. It was dated March 23rd, 1987. Beatrice had written, I believe there is something deeply wrong here. I've seen large donations going somewhere they shouldn't. Sister Margaret thinks I'm imagining things, but I know what I saw. I will speak with the bishop tomorrow. If anything happens to me, someone must look into this. It had never been sent. The FBI later confirmed that the bishop named in the letter had received large grants from Creed's shell company. He resigned under pressure just days after the information was released. The network, as evil and well hidden as it was, finally began to crumble from the inside. In early spring, 5 years after the vanishing and a year after Margaret's return, the families of all confirmed victims gathered at a small private ceremony in New Mexico. The government had declassified portions of the case. A special task force was formed to search for any remaining members of Creed's system. Margaret stood at the podium. Her voice was soft but steady. Beatrice gave her life because she believed the truth should never stay buried. I speak today not just for her, but for all the women who never got to return. We were silenced for years, but now the silence is over. By summer, the final arrests were made. Teresa Klein received 25 years in federal prison. She accepted a plea deal after testifying against several high-ranking operatives. The Light of Harvest and all affiliated organizations were shut down permanently. The remaining victims were placed into protection and therapy programs funded by the federal government and charitable partners. The tapes were sealed permanently in FBI archives. And Elijah Creed, he died behind bars 11 months later from a stroke. Not a word of regret, not a single apology. Just silence. Agent Rourke retired soon after. He didn't take any press interviews. He kept the letter Beatrice wrote in his desk drawer. He never forgot her name. And now, finally, the world knew the truth. The 2 nuns who vanished in 1987 were never lost. They were buried beneath lies, money, and power. One died trying to stop it. The other came back to finish what they started. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, another to strengthen our community, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.